Okay, so before I start talking about using layer masks with selections, I want to just mention a couple quick things about raster masks. So one thing to note is that you can enable or disable the mask by selecting the icon right here, the one that has the little dotted line marquee around it, by holding down the Shift key and then clicking it. And then you can see that one, it goes away, but two, it has that little X going over, that little red X going right through the middle, indicating that it's not in use right now. So it's really similar to using this little, the little I key to hide. That just disables it. If you want to turn it back on, you can hit Shift and click it again. Or if you want to get rid of it entirely, like I said earlier, you can just drag it and drop it into the trash, but we want to keep it. Another thing to consider is, excuse me, when there's this link right here, that link indicates that whatever happens to the sunflowers is going to happen to the mask and vice versa. If you wanted to get rid of that link, you just click it and then it toggles away, and you can use your move tool to just drag and drop and move things around. So I can move this part of the mask, or I can move this part of the mask, and they'll move separately. And for projects that are a little bit less defined, like this is a really clearly defined object, right? It's pretty obvious when you move it around. If you have something that's a little bit more detailed or like a pattern, then moving the background around and playing with it, this kind of tool can be a little bit more useful. So it just depends on what project you're working on, and that'll become more evident to you while you're working. Another thing to take note of is when you're manipulating these masks, um, yes, this brush tool works, but also these other, like any kind of tool that you use on it is going to be applied to that as well. So like the eraser, the smudge tool, the brush tool, anything like this paint bucket tool, depending on what color you're using. If you're using black, or if you're using white, like black will reveal everything in the background and white will obscure it. Hello. Now I gotta switch them. And see, that erased out my whole cat too. And then the gradient tool is one that's really fun to play with in here as well. So, okay, but then you can see in this little layer mask what's happening in the image itself, and that's just a really good visual cue to go back and forth between. Okay, so there's a lot of room for experimentation in here. Now I'm going to show you how to make a mask using the selection tool. It's going to be very similar to using the brush tool, but it's going to be used to select pixels in a slightly different way. So I'm going to come over here into the tool section and grab the quick select tool, and I'm just going to click the object I want. And it works best, as you'll recall, in areas that have high concentration, and a lot of contrast. So there's a large contrast between this black backdrop and this white cat. If I were working with the background layer, this sunflower, because there's a lot of texture going on in the background and yellow and green are kind of similar, it might have a harder time picking up on those pixels, but as you can see here, it really had no problem selecting that cat. And this area down here just represents the part of the image that's still visible because of my canvas size that I selected and how large I made the image so that it would fit into this canvas and this artboard. It does still have the rest of that image. So if I were to put the bounding box around it, you can see that that's where the image still exists. If I pulled it up, you could see that as well. And you can see what's behind the layer masks, right? but we're not too worried about that. I just wanted to, in case you were confused or if that happens on any of yours, you can know that like the marching ants or this little marquee is surrounding your entire image. Okay, and then I'm going to just hit the new mask button since I have my selection picked out the way I want it to be. And there we go. I can see that it has created a layer mask of the object I want in a really clean and quick way. And if the selection tool made any selections that you wanted to go back in and edit out, you want to make sure that you go to the brush tool and pick the color black because black will hide it. Okay. And there's a little bit of this background being revealed from the black cat or the white cat's black background. It's hard to say. And then you want to make sure your brush is the size that you want it. You can go into the brush tool and just toggle it around until it's the size you want. And take something kind of small. And I can see there's some of this like black kind of yuckiness that I'll just erase out. And if I wanted that to look more natural, I could use the gray, but just for the sake of the example, I'm going to just scale back out. And then I'll show you guys how to make the inverse selection. And the way to do the inverse is, so if you can see here, I got rid of that mask that I had started. I'm back to my original set of layers, my backdrop and my cat. And I will select it using the quick select tool, which I've already done. You can see the little ants are marching around it. And I just did that by clicking and dragging. And then I go into select and I hit inverse. Now you can see that these little marching ants, the marquee is going around everything. It's going around the outside of the background and it's going around the outside edge of the cat. So that means everything is selected but the cat. And if I go down here and select the mask tool, then it has created a mask that subtracts everything else. Okay. And that's not super useful for this project if we're trying to combine this cat and this background, but if you're trying to do it in, like if this was your intent, that's another great way to do it.